Okay. Welcome, guys. Welcome to our FST5 webinar series. This is our July 23 episode, and we're super for our guests to speak with us today. We have had many requests to have this actual conversation come up, and it is talking about generational first responders and how being a generational first responder kind of, gauges your relationship with your family, and then also it gauges the work that you do. So we're super excited about having this conversation. So I'll get a little housekeeping out of the way. I am Manisha Leary. I'm the program manager of Frontline Strong Together. We are a program that is funded by the state of Michigan and developed by Wayne State University. Our website is fst5.org. You can go there to find all things mental health, behavioral health for first responders and their families throughout the state of Michigan. If you are in need of crisis or any resources, you can also call 1-833-34-STRONG. Again, that is 1-833-347-8766. And then if you are live watching this, feel free to use our QR code if you want to put your phone up there and take that right to our websites or any of our social media links. Okay, so feel free to share this link to this webinar, any of your registration links. We will let people in throughout the entire time that we are on the webinar today. We continue to do that. And before we get started, just so that some of our faithful people who watch us every month know that we are going to take the month of July off, and we will start again in August. Okay, so this will be our last one before our month break, and then we'll get started again in August. So as you guys all know, Kobe's back. Last month he was feeling under the weather, so we are excited to have Kobe Taylor back. Kobe is my co-host here, the FST5 webinar series. He's also a firefighter with the Northwestern Peninsula Fire Department, right? I always try to get it right. I think I mix it up every time.
Yeah, you combined the peer team and the fire department, but it's all good.
Yes, I do. So yes, I will let Kobe give himself a little bit more of his background, then we will get our guests introduced and get started on this webinar today. So thank you guys again for joining us. Without further ado, Kobe.
Thank you, Manisha. Like Manisha said, my name is Kobe Taylor. I'm a firefighter with Peninsula Township out of Grand Traverse County. I'm going on my 23rd year in the fire service, and I always tell everyone, in my opinion, it's the greatest job out there. But in order to keep doing this job, you have to keep mentally and physically prepared and ready to handle what comes at you, whether it's mentally or physically. And that's what's super important about Frontline Strong. So definitely use those resources. As some of you may know, that I do want to touch on is we had 2 suicides at the beginning of this month down in the Kent area. So we definitely need to watch out for each other and just watch each other's back. If we see someone being different or just acting out of the norm, we need to definitely reach out to them. And if we're feeling out of the norm, we need to, just like we exercise to be prepared for this job, and whatever call we receive, we need to be prepared for that mentally as well. So please reach out to us. But it is an honor of mine to introduce Kevin Selmeyer. He's support everything I've ever done in the fire service, and I'm very grateful for that. He continues to support the fire service in general for the state, and really on a mission to make our fire service the top in the state. So thank you for being here, Kevin.
Hey, thanks, Kobe. Thanks for having me on. So you want me to do a little introduction, right? So for those of you, if our paths have not crossed, I'm Kevin Selmeyer. I am the state fire marshal currently. Prior to being the state fire marshal, I thought I retired and was going to teach and do a lot of cool stuff. And I got to do a lot of cool stuff, but then this opportunity came along to be the state fire marshal. But prior to that, just over 30 years in the city of Grand Rapids. And Kobe, you talk about 23 years. I was doing the math today. I'm in my 39th year in the fire service. And it actually started with the Michigan Air National Guard. So it was kind of cool yesterday. There was a flyover. From what I understand, I'm not in Michigan this week, but it's kind of hard to see because of the smoke. But the 127th fighter wing, or refueling wing now, is a fighter wing when I was in it, out of Selfridge. So it was kind of cool to see them mark the 100th anniversary of that. So I spent 6 years in the Michigan Air National Guard as a crash fire rescue firefighter at about the same time I started with Grand Rapids. So kind of a couple parallel worlds there. So, and I've got tonight, Kobe asked me, we've got Sean Selmeyer, my son, who is a Muskegon firefighter. I'll let Sean introduce himself and kind of his path on how he got to where he's at.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Selmeyer. I've been at Muskegon for just under 2 years. And then before that, I got my start at Cortland Township Fire Department.
Awesome. Thank you guys both so much for being here. We're super excited. So as I mentioned before we got started, that today's topic is generational first responders. Kevin, you already got Go Fire Dogs.
I see
Follow
that.
firefighter
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to remind anyone, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please go ahead and add in the chat or the Q&A box. You can put all your questions there. Kobe and I will read them out to our panelists here today. And if there's any questions during the presentation at all, feel free to go ahead and jump in and give those there as well. We'll read them out just like I just did there. Okay, so as Kevin mentioned, Sean is his son, but also Kevin, your father was a firefighter as well, right?
Yeah. My
Okay,
dad.
so tell
My
us
dad
about
did
your family history.
Yeah. So my dad retired as the fire chief out of Selfridge at the Air National Guard base just north of Detroit. He was in the fire service for 34 years prior to his retirement. He started out in the Air Force too. My mom and dad both met in the Air Force. My dad was a firefighter. My mom was a nurse. And my mom went up. So I grew up in, I don't know if you want to say, the first responder medical family, right? So my sister and I talked about that. There were a lot of Christmases where both mom and dad were gone. And I also will say this, my dad was working 72-hour work weeks then, which meant you worked every other day. And every 2 weeks, you got 3 days off in a row. So there was a lot of Christmases where my mom would go to work at the hospital during the day, and my dad would be gone for the 24-hour shifts. So, that's part of, growing up in the whole firefighter family, right? And so that's kind of a dynamic that's kind of unique. And I didn't think I wanted to be a firefighter at first. And I thought I was going to be a graphic artist. I thought I was going to be a printer. And but I had this realization, I guess, watching paper come out of a printing press 40 some years ago, that wasn't for me. And then I went to my dad, and he's the reason that I ended up in the Michigan Air National Guard. He said, well, yesterday you want to be a printer, today you want to be a firefighter. So, I think sometimes you grow up in a house and you say, well, I want to do what my dad did. That wasn't my case. And, I kind of worked my way into the fire service by joining the Michigan Air National Guard and then going to Air Force basic training in the Air Force Fire School. And it was at the Air Force Fire School, 39 years ago that I said, this is what I want to do. So, and then it was the Detroit area, the auto industry was in the tank, 1983, 1984. A lot of folks were laid off. So I went over to Grand Rapids because they were hiring. I mean, a lot of folks asked me, how did I end up over there? They offered me a job and I had an opportunity, and went over to West Michigan, love it over there. But still have roots back in Macomb County. My dad is still alive. Lives up in New Baltimore, up in northern Macomb County. So Sean and I get a chance. I know Sean was over there last week, had him out fishing on Lake St. Clair. So we try to do some things together.
There we go. Awesome. That's amazing. Just so everyone knows, the picture that's on the invitation to the webinar is the three of you guys together. So that's a very special picture there.
Yeah. And that was over in Muskegon last fall. Sean was on duty that night. My parents were over visiting, so we went over there. So that was kind of neat to, get the three generations, right? So that picture means a lot to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a great picture. Okay. So Sean, tell us how you got started with the fire service. Were you also a son of wanting to do a different route, or was this something you looked forward to?
Yeah. So actually, I was I went to the high school program at the Kent Career Tech Center to be a cop, and then I got to the report writing part and realized that it wasn't really for me. And just through Dad's business, I always got to tag along to bus extrication classes and live fire and traditional extrication, and it just kind of appealed to me. And yeah, kind of similar. Didn't really think I wanted to follow along until I realized kind of what I wanted to do. So yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about how it was for you being a third generation firefighter and then kind of growing up in a home of having this kind of first responder world. We often hear from the children of first responders that it's a very kind of different life than most of like friends and people that you guys hang out with in school. So give us a little bit of background there.
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of time on the road selling rescue tools, and then, it's always different for Christmases and whatnot. You go down to the fire station, and we still do it in Muskegon where the families come down and, you make a big dinner and hang out with everyone. So it's a little different, kind of explaining to your friends that, no, my dad's gone for 24 hours. By the time I had gotten older, Dad was into the training department, so it was a little bit different. But, growing up, if you need the playground or whatever, you'd go into the confidence course and play around in that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, and Kevin, you give us your experience from you also being a son and a father of how it was growing up in the fire service.
Well, like I shared, my dad worked 72-hour work weeks. So it was, you work 24 hours, you're off for 24 hours, you're back the next day. It's really changed. We talk about, the Michigan Professional Firefighter Union, I know is very involved in this process too. And Kobe sits on the committee, and I spent a lot of time on the Safety and Health Committee. And the work hours are something that, we worked hard through the union to get changed, to get to the schedules that we're at. So, I grew up in a lot of times my dad was on duty at 8:00 in the morning. He would already, I'd already be gone to school and when he was coming home. And so, that every other day it was kind of, there were times it was kind of hit and miss that, especially when I got into high school and stuff, that sometimes, I'd be leaving early in the morning to go do stuff. He had already left for work and then coming and then, that looping around. So that was, a little bit different, like I said. And, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, even for back in those days, even to coach and different things, it was hard because, you worked every other day. So it wasn't the traditional, hey, we're going to go play Little League and, all the dads kind of get out there and help and different things like that. So it definitely was different. And, also like Sean hits on the holidays. I don't know that I even know how to celebrate my birthday on my birthday, if that makes sense. And that goes back to being a kid is you did it when, it worked. The same thing with Christmas. And, a lot of the things that we have on the career side of the fire service, to be able to trade time and do some of the things we're able to do today, that wasn't allowed back then. And so it wasn't a matter of, hey, I'm going to trade part of the day and be home and different. You were expected to be on duty and different things like that. So we've come a long ways from that. But, it's kind of like, even the teachers say, hey, you need to go home and tell your parents. And I just kind of scratch my head on that one of how am I going to do that when potentially one of them isn't going to be there tonight because they're on duty, And then, so, I think that plays a part of it, of being away, right? And but you get used to it, and I joke about the same thing with the holidays. Sometimes Christmas Eve was the day, sometimes it was Christmas Day, sometimes it was the day after. It just depended based on schedule, especially my mom being a nurse. So she had to be at the hospital to work her shift too. So
Kevin, we've talked about this before, but I like to kind of talk about it here. When you found out Sean kind of wanted to go into this career path, did you have any concerns knowing that we're going on a lot more gruesome calls than just knowing what we're seeing now? Did you have any concerns as a father that's already been in that line of work?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part that was kind of an interesting gap. So that gap between retired from Grand Rapids and being the state fire marshal, I too was on the Cortland Township Fire Department. And when I was in Grand Rapids, I ran on folks day in and day out that I didn't know. Most of the folks that I ran calls on, I didn't know who they were. And it was after I retired from Grand Rapids and started running calls in Cortland Township that I was running calls on kids, parents that I coached in hockey and stuff, and people in the community that we knew through Boy Scouts and stuff. So it was neighbors, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned as the state fire marshal is that the career segment of the fire service has, if you want to say, an exposure to mental health, maybe in a different way than the volunteer side or the paid on call side of it, because we didn't necessarily run on folks that were our friends and family. But when you get into a paid on call environment and you're living in the community where you live, you're running on that, on those calls where, hey, it's so-and-so that you coached or you're in scouts with his grandfather or her grandfather, right? So those were some of the things that were kind of different. So when Sean came to me, I was already a state fire marshal and he said, hey, I think I want to do this. And I said, hey, you need to go up and talk to the chief up in Cortland Township. And Sean was kind of like, you're not going to do that? Or you're going to come with me? And I go, no, you got to go do that. You got to, go express your interest. And, I think some of the conversations, even watching, it was interesting. I'd be laying in bed at night, and I'd hear the tones go off and I'd hear Sean go out the door, to go run a call. And that was really different. But we even had conversations that Sean goes, hey, the whole thing with HIPAA and the whole thing, we can't share a lot of information, but Sean, I think early on too, it was, man, those are people we know. And I think that's part of the whole thing of, as we look across this as first responders and why this frontline strong is so important is how do we decompress after we run on those calls, especially on folks that we run with. And Kobe, to go back to the original kind of question, but kind of get there. Yeah, it did concern me, especially when Sean went over to Muskegon. And I think it was probably one of the first weeks, he came home and he'd come walking in the morning. And that was always kind of cool working from home during COVID and stuff. Sean would come in from shift and I'd say, hey, what'd you have yesterday? Right. And, he was telling me some of the stuff, I think probably his first week, he went on a gunshot wound, point blank, and and then there was a person who tried to take their lives by setting themselves on fire. And it was talking with Sean about that, of going, hey, we got to talk about this. We got to deal with this. We got to keep moving forward, because if you let that get inside you and build up, it'll tear you apart. And I think, Kobe, that's what we're really trying to talk about here, right? Is that realizing, I don't care if you've been doing this for 39 years, you've been doing this for 2 years. If we're going to be resilient, we got to talk about it, and we got to reach out, and we got to be talking to folks and getting help. And the whole peer thing's huge too.
Sorry, there we go. We have got to get these mute buttons together.
Yeah, Kobe's muted.
Yeah, I'm like, we've got to get these mute buttons together. Both of us are over here talking and we're both muted. So Sean, tell us, and Kevin, you both probably can answer this question, but Kobe and I are always talking, and we want to get the perspective of our panelists of how you guys see asking for help and how you guys see the need of the members in, because being the state fire marshal, and then also Sean, you being a younger generation firefighter, do you feel like there's a space where it's easier for you to kind of have these conversations, whereas Kevin, it may have been more difficult for you in your career? So tell us about your experiences with asking for help.
Talking to me or talking to Sean?
Sean, let's start with Sean, because I want to hear his first. Yeah.
I feel like since I've came into the fire service, the culture has been very positive about asking for help and talking about it, even in the academy, especially in MFR and EMT. It was always, if you need to ask for help, it doesn't make you anything less. And like Dad said, even going on my ride-alongs with EMT and just bouncing calls off of each other, it was always kind of nice to have that second person who has gone through, those experiences that are very unique to the fire service, especially coming from Rockford and going to Muskegon. There was a little bit of a culture shock there. There's quite a few things you'd never seen until you step off the back seat of the engine, and you know what I mean? Just being able to bounce that off of them. And our union's been a great help for getting, people set up to talk to and that type of stuff if you need anything. So since I've been into the fire service, there's never been a hesitation that if I need it to go to someone, or even just sitting on the bumper at night, bouncing something off of a lieutenant or a firefighter and being able to talk it out with them. There's never been a negative connotation. It's to the point even where in Muskegon, where if you run a bad call, the deputy director, the chief will, ask you if you need anything. It's we try to be very proactive on our mental health here.
I'm glad to hear that, actually, because we have,
Yeah.
well, we talk about this all the time. There's a lot of departments that are not that progressive with being able to ask for help.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, Kevin,
And
what's your
Kobe, can I
experience?
bring something up?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that Sean got exposed to, I think he'd been at Muskegon maybe a month, was there's a guy by the name of Silouan Green, and we're bringing him back to Michigan 4 times this fall. We're going to have him in the Upper Peninsula for Sault Ste. Marie and Marquette in September. And we're also going to have him in Cortland Township in Northern Kent County on a Saturday in September, and then also over in Oakland County. But Sean, they hosted it over in Muskegon, and Sean went to the class, and he's a month on and the whole thing. And I said to him afterwards, I said, "Hey, what'd you think about that training?" And he goes, "Dad, everybody who's in the fire service or is going to be in charge should have that class." And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do too, is through the Michigan Firefighter Training Council allowing me to take some of the funding that's coming back from classes that have been canceled or didn't get run, and we're putting it towards mental health. And the idea is we're trying to expand ideas. And I waited until it was done. I didn't hype up Silouan's class to Sean or anything. I just let him go to the class. And I think I might even waited about a week, and I just said, hey, by the way, how was that class last week? And that's some of the stuff that we have to look at is part of how do we take care of each other day to day? And I'll even go one step further. What role does the company officer play? What role does the senior firefighter play? And you don't have to have bugles on your collar. I'll share this. I've worked under and with some of the best senior firefighters. When I was in Grand Rapids, there were firefighters that, they weren't promoted up through the ranks, but even as a deputy chief, I went and talked with them. Hey, how do you think this is this a good approach? Is this something that we should be getting involved in? Is this something we should be looking at exploring? And I think the hierarchy part of the fire service is important, but that informal part of the fire service is just important. And I saw that when I was at Cortland Township, even, as a paid on call firefighter. And that's what the part that we need to focus on is if this is really about being brothers and sisters, then we got to act like it. And when I say act like it, we got to be willing to, here's one of the things when you put it out there. Hey, if you need anything, let me know. Well, if you say that, you better have something or someone that you can point this person to, because you're more than likely to get taken up on that. And it shouldn't be, well, let me get back with you, because if they're asking you, you should be able to say, hey, here's so-and-so's number. You should call Kobe, or you should call whatever we have to do. We've got to get a little better at that. But, it's interesting to hear how much it's changing. And this is good we're having these conversations because that wasn't always in the past.
Yeah, to touch on Silouan Green, I'm pretty pumped about that. We're going to have him on a webinar for August 29th, and I was telling Manisha all about him, and she hasn't seen his class yet, so I'm pretty excited for her to get to hear him speak, because it's eye-opening, and Sean could probably talk on that, but it's phenomenal, and it's really good for those early officers and even senior members to be in that class.
Yeah, I got the big smile on my face as soon as I heard you say his name. So say, hey, we have him coming on to the webinar. So we're super excited for courses like that and situations like that. Can you, and Kobe, you can jump in and talk to this as well. Sean and Kevin, when you guys started to get to in situations where it was a little bit closer to serving people that you knew and that were in your community, what are some of those effects, some of the lasting effects that has on you that sometimes lingers to the day-to-day that could be triggered down the line, or years later, if you kind of had those experiences that we don't often think about in the moment, right? So yeah, what are some of the things that when the run that you go on hits closer to home, how do you prepare and cope and work yourself through those type of situations? Kevin.
Sean, you want to take this one?
I can, I guess. I personally, I never do anything to prepare before getting there other than thinking about what I need to do call wise, just going through, like the mental checklist of everything you got to accomplish. But as far as after, it's definitely different. I don't know that I handle it any different other than, it definitely, like you said, it lingers, stays on your mind a little bit more. I never had a bad one with anyone that I personally knew, but it was kind of weird, bumping back into your neighbor or whatnot a week later in the supermarket and kind of rechecking up on them. That doesn't happen so much out here. That was always different, or you drive by their house every day and you're reminded of when you went there, that type of thing. Like I said, I never had anything really bad as far as that front, but.
Yeah, early on in my career, we ran on my assistant chief, kind of touching on what Sean's talking about. Like you're just preparing to do the job. And it wasn't until we got her airlifted and out of there when our chief let us know who it was, and then it clicked, because you're so tunnel vision on doing whatever task you're given that I didn't even realize it was her. Of course, she was in really bad shape, but that was very early on in my career, and we didn't, and that was a paid on call department that I'm still a part of, and we didn't do really nothing for that, which is kind of sad. I know we, especially in that department now, we do a lot better with that because we've had a couple of deaths since then within our department, and we really go all out to make sure everyone's doing good. But during that call, especially with someone that I started my career with, we didn't do nothing afterwards. So just thinking back on that after you asked that question, it's like, wow.
Yeah, in fact, after some of those tough calls, Kobe, you'll remember too, is we all kind of scattered, right? It was like, all right, nobody really knows what to say to each other because this isn't stuff we talked about. So, I even saw it in Grand Rapids and fire stations. The kitchen table was different that night when you sat down to eat dinner, or, you normally would sit in a room and kind of talk and stuff. And everybody's kind of just off doing their own thing. And I noticed that even on the paid on call departments, that after the call, everybody was like, okay, gotta go. And probably the best thing to do is, as Sean talks about, bring people back together. I think the headsets in the engine were one of the best things that ever came along. I don't have hearing aids, so I have been in the business for a long time and I still have my hearing. That's a good thing, right? But we talked about stuff even on the way back from a call. Hey, Kobe, you doing all right? Or wow, that was, we didn't expect that one, right? And then the following up on each other too. Sometimes I will say this through my career, I had folks that I worked with as peers and that I also led that, hey, I'm just going to call the person and check in on them. And it wasn't like we talked every single day. We were close, but we didn't, I guess maybe be a little different today with texting and stuff, but we would add a call and just say, hey, Kobe, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing all right. Or hey, and the idea is that checking in on each other. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
It's a component for sure.
And we can't be afraid to ask our chiefs and captains how they're doing, because that's a huge component that honestly gets forgotten because they're taking care of us, right? But they need to be thought about too. And it doesn't hurt, even if you're a probie, to be like, Cap, you doing all right? That you knew that person for 30 something years. Are you doing all right? Because they're taking on huge stress, right? They're doing sometimes the media debriefings and just taking on a lot of weight. So we really have to watch over our leadership as well.
Absolutely. Okay, Sean, I think we have a question for you. It says, as an older generation, Kevin might be glad that we have more debriefings and the newer generations gets a great level of support. What does Sean think we can do better to change the younger people as he continues on? So like in terms of supporting the younger people, what do you think the fire kind of as a whole, fire EMS a career as a whole could do better to support your generation?
I know one of the things that we just implemented is we just set one of our union brothers through peer support training. That was, I think they finally finished up the training 2 months ago. So obviously I don't know if anyone's had to use it or not. That's part of it. But I think that was a great stepping stone. I don't know. I've never experienced it where it's not, you run a tough call. Even at Cortland where I started, you'd run a tough call and the senior guys are calling you the next morning and asking you if you want to grab breakfast and how you're doing, or, you're driving down the road and you pull over and talk to them at their mailbox or whatever. Same thing at shift change. We got the responder app so they can see if you went on anything kind of really crazy, and they'll ask you, are you doing all right? Or, like you said, vice versa, your lieutenant calling you or you calling your lieutenant or a different lieutenant and just kind of texting them, hey, how you doing? Or calling them, or even after a fire, sometimes you'll get a text like, hey, good job today. Or, hey, I want to train on this. It's kind of with being able to text, we can on the spur of a moment, you can, be thinking about what you did and want to work on something, and just instantly get that thought out there before you kind of forget about it and sweep it underneath the rug, whether that be like mentally, brain wise, what you saw or did, or like physically, you want to work on this skill because you didn't like the outcome of it. So you want to drill on it 10 times or whatever,
Actually, that's a really great answer to that question, because we all in our world, we often are like, okay, also being good at the job and making sure you're doing things right on the job too is also something that becomes a reflection for our first responders as well. So that's great that you have that kind of instant response there. Kevin, is there anything in either currently that you guys are working on at the state fire marshal level, or things that you personally did during your career that's promoted you having an outlet?
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of my career, there were no critical incident stress debriefings. And I think that's where we saw a big push. So even the Michigan Professional Firefighter Union, back in I would say it's probably in the early 90s, said, hey, this is a big push. We trained a bunch of people. We had teams. I wasn't involved so much in the teams, but I was a big believer in that. A lot of the folks were like, I don't want to go sit in a room. I don't want to sit in a circle. And I don't want to talk about it. But you know what? There was value in sitting in the room. There's value in talking about it. And I think when we start looking at the peer stuff, and that's where, I will say this, Kobe has been advocating on behalf of the fire service. And there's a lot of folks that are, and I'm going to leave out some folks, but that are on our committees presently working for the firefighters union. And I'll say this for all the associations, the chiefs, the inspectors, the instructors, the Firemen's Association, and the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union, we've got a lot of folks that are working hard to come up with a lot of different programs, and we're starting to mesh them all kind of together. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to look out after each other. And Kobe and I had this conversation. I think the peer thing of, hey, how do I ask? Or it's a little awkward. And I'll also say this. I'll give a plug. I've been working with the National Fallen Firefighter Foundation for the last 13 years, and they have a class called Stress First Aid. And in that class, it's kind of hokey. A lot of folks, you watch the scenarios, and it's online. You can go watch it. So, but one of the older guys is asking a younger guy, kid, it was a tough call, or I remember those tough calls, because there's a lot of chatter that goes on at the gear locker. I don't care whether you're at a paid on call fire department, you're at a career fire department. The coming and goings at the station, whether it's shift change or it's training night or what it is, there's opportunities to have conversations with people. And I think that's what Kobe and a lot of other folks were truly trying to promote, is how do we get people comfortable to facilitate that conversation? I think if we fix a lot of that, we won't have to have a lot of critical incident stress debriefings. And I know it's all part of the process. And I got to give a big shout out to the Michigan Firefighter Training Council, because without the members who are on the past council, and a lot of them, there's only one returning member to this council. So, but the consistency has been there of, hey, when we get the funding from time to time that comes back and such, that we're putting it towards how do we keep developing, mental health awareness, resiliency, training, and even a lot of the push to get to where we are tonight on a webinar. There was Sean Abbey, who was who's got his own program that him and his daughter do. I've known Sean forever, it feels like, but Sean was always advocating, we got to do more, right? Well, you start looking at, hey, how do we get the governor's office, right, to come on board? Governor Whitmer says, hey, we're going to put money towards first responder mental health. This is a huge start, and it's sustainable funding, right? And that's the other thing that I want to make sure that people understand. This is available. This program that we're talking about tonight, right? The Frontline Stronger Together is for everyone. It doesn't matter, what color your fire truck is, what style helmet you wear, any of that stuff. What we need people to understand is, whether you do more fire or more EMS or it's law enforcement, we're all seeing stuff. And as Kobe brought up, it's been a tough couple of weeks in the Michigan Fire Service and EMS. With a couple of responders, dying by suicide. We got to do better with that. And I think that's the part that we're really trying to, is to get it out there so that it's on a bulletin board. Because this is the other thing, I hit on this a little bit ago. You better have the number in your phone if you're going to be claiming to be wanting to help folks. But with that being said, how do we get it where, I don't know, there's a poster on every fire station wall across the whole state? And it doesn't matter if I'm in Champion up in the UP, or I'm down in Canton, down in the Metro Detroit area. I'm going to walk into a fire station and there should be that number to call. And that, when we get to that point, so that people have ready access to it. And then further, even better, how do you get them to take that number home so the whole family has access to it? Because this program it is for the first responders, but it's also for the spouses, it's significant others, it's girlfriends, boyfriends, cousins. I mean, it's how do we all work together to make sure folks at least know there's a number they can call, and when they do call, somebody answers it.
I think that's huge, and I gotta say, I'm definitely proud of the fire service and where we're kind of very proactive. But it's sad to see, like, because I sit on the rural EMS mental health board as well, and just the EMS side, how that's lagging as well. They see that and they're trying to make change, but I mean, they're behind still. And once you're behind, it's just hard to catch up. And law enforcement, Mike, who asked one of the questions, he's one of our deputies on our team, phenomenal dude, and he's doing great stuff for our teams, always very proactive. But I mean, he'll tell you that law enforcement is behind on that, and we really need to help each other because we're on the same call. But it is different because I'm going back to the station with sometimes 4 people, depending on who we have on call that day. Whereas they're going back to their cars sometimes by themselves and just taking that all in and going to the next call. So it is a different situation, but I think what we're doing here with Frontline Strong is covering all those 5 bases and working with all the different unions to help each other out. Because first responder suicide in your area, you're going to typically know that person, whether they're law enforcement, fire, EMS, and it sucks. It takes a lot out of your area and just hurts a lot of people, especially when you know them and having coffee, whether they're coming to the station or vice versa. So we definitely have to do a better job overall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, we have a few questions, and I think last time we almost ran out of time to do questions. So, um, this one says, back to generational issues. Sean, you mentioned the police academy. What changed your mind to move from police to fire? Also, how does your mom feel about you being in the fire service? And then what's the thoughts of other friends and family? Have you had any other kind of like thoughts of you being a part of the fire service from other support systems?
So I guess as far as friends and family, it's all been support. Um, the police to fire, it was in high school. It was similar an explorer program. For the last half of your day, you could go to the Kent Career Tech Center. I went to Rockford, so they'd bust you down, or you could drive. Um, it was 2 hours. It was just a high school explorer class, counted towards some college credit. Um, Honestly, it was the report writing and just the climate, the way it changed, and they'd set up scenarios with the blue guns and stuff, and it was always fun, but not as much as stretching lines and doing searches and that type of stuff. And then as far as my mom, I know she worries a lot more for me. She's told me that, because we kind of talked about it one night, and she had basically said that, well, he's got 30 years on and you got 2. So it's kind of hard not to worry more about you because you can't have that experience, basically, is what she said. So.
And that's interesting that that was that she like came out to you and say that right away. And she probably went through that same experience with your father and then having
Yeah.
to worry about you in the same space. It's kind of like a continuation for her.
Yeah, it was kind of, we had talked about it. My battalion chief's dad was also a firefighter, and we were talking about that at the kitchen table, that there was a saying that traditionally the mom of a firefighter whose husband's also a firefighter, there's some study that came out that said that seems to be true. So I actually went to her and I asked her at dinner at home the next day off. So that's kind of how that came about.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the supports of families, because that was going to be a question that we asked for the both of you, is it has to be hard for your immediate family and like parents as well to know that you guys go out and do the work that you do every single day. So how do you guys support not only each other, like, mom or father and son, but also your mom, any siblings and grandparents, with kind of keeping them in the space of knowing that you're doing the best that you can do to come home every day? Either one of you can start for that question.
I think the big thing that, and I think about it, as much as his mom worries about him, I worry about him too. That, the reality is that, there isn't the staffing today that there was 30 years ago in some fire departments. And so we're going to calls with a whole lot less people. There's something that I shared with Sean the first day was, it's not every time and not every place. And what I mean by that is, to always say, well, we're going to go through the front door with a hose line, we're going to put the fire out. That works when you arrive with 10, or you arrive with 8, or you arrive with 18. But when you arrive with 8 and it's going to be over time or less than that, I'm running into firefighters as a state fire. They're telling me we get 2 or 3 people during the day, we're doing good. And I saw that when I was in Cortland Township, and that's one of the things where we have to look at it and say, if there's 3 of us, we can only do this. That's all humanly possible we can do. If we call for help and we get more people to arrive and they get there, then we'll go at it maybe a different way. But that kind of plays with your mental health a little bit too, because we got into this to help people and to save people and to be active in the community. And that's the part that, I said a little bit earlier, and I want to share it again, is, a lot of folks have EAP programs, employee assistance programs, but a lot of people don't. And, this is one of the things that Kobe and I have had this discussion a whole bunch, and we're even meeting with some people with the Michigan Township Association as such, that, we've got first responders who don't have the best health insurance through their job, but they're being exposed to stuff while they're as a paid on call or a volunteer, or even as a career firefighter. And I believe that the employer owns a big part of that mental health. And what I'm saying with that is, if you have somebody that you brought into your department, I'll talk about paid on call fire department, and all of a sudden they're struggling with the stuff they've seen in the first few years. Instead of saying, well, that's just part of the business, we should be saying, no, hey, how do I work with the township officials so that I can get them the help that they need? I've met first responders that are telling me that they've actually been turned over to collections on their mental health visits. And that's crazy if you think about it, but that's real. And this isn't just one person. This is multiple people telling me this. And so that's why I think, as much as we have this frontline Stronger Together program, it's a clearinghouse where you can call and such. We've got to look at something that would be statewide. That Kobe and I have talked about this. If you could get your mental health visits paid for, so I pay out of pocket $150 to see a clinician, right, or $200. I could submit that receipt, and in a very timely manner, I could get that $150, $200 back. If we could get to that, because that's when we've got some folks that really are deep into some things that, coming up with co-pays even, or coming up with paying for the whole thing themselves, that out of pocket part is the tough part. We got to figure a way around that, because we're going to see stuff. That's part of running these calls, whether you're in the smallest place or the biggest place. Zip code doesn't have anything to do with it. I've always said that even about fire. That fire doesn't care what zip code it's in. That's science and natural laws in motion, and you're stepping in between it somewhere to try to put this thing out. But the reality is what you see on the job. There has to be a way, whether it's to start with calling your service for a number to get you started, to how do you have everyone, we got to start looking at this. You should have a mental health professional that is like a dentist, is like where you go to get your, your glasses, or if you wear glasses, you go get an optometrist to give you an exam. You should be getting a physical every year. Well, one of the things that we were starting to do in Grand Rapids when I was leaving there was we started asking questions even in the physical, and it wasn't a super duper physical. I'm not going to say that it could have used some more work, but just the fact of somebody saying, but I also talked with the doctors when we were administrating that program. Hey, if somebody asks, you got to be ready to point them towards that. And that keeps going back to that. But if we don't ask, then how do we know where folks are at? So, and something that I shared at a fire academy graduation, and I'll share it. Sean's mom wants him to come home every day. Sean's mom wants his fire department to take good care of him. Sean's mom wants his fire department to provide access to mental health, right? But you know what? Everybody who's on this call's got a mom, and it's no different whether you're a first responder, because Sean's mom has been around the fire service for 30 some years, right? It doesn't change it. The reality is that folks get into, whether it's law enforcement, EMS, or fire, and they want to help in the community. What we really don't do a great job of telling them is, you're going to see some stuff that most people are never going to see in their lifetime. And then we've got to be ready to support them when they're having issues with coping with it. And how do we get them to be more resilient so that they understand, okay, I should feel this way, and this is the process to help me get the help so that maybe I can get back to feeling in a way that I want to feel. How about that? I don't know. Kobe, is that a good technical term? I'm not sure, but
I like it.
We don't want people to get back in that feeling good again mode, right?
Right. And if the job is what's changing them, whether you're paid on call or full-time, there's got to be some ownership there. And we've talked about that multiple times. So you got to take care of your people, because I tell you, and I mean, you've been a part of it, I've been a part of it, of a funeral with suicide. You want to talk about draining your department for 6-7 years, that'll do it. And you're looking at cost of retention and just more money. So it just makes sense to definitely put that money away when they need that help, and invest in your people like you do with their year.
Yeah.
Okay. Sean, we got another question for you. So Sean, the question for you here says, are you seeing the type of assistance with debriefings and being able to have access to like your department and talking to them, and the police departments? Are you seeing that in your, does the police and fire like debrief together? Do you guys do that with the EMS groups, or is that just the FD?
I know we had a very high profile call 4 months ago that had a mandatory debrief for everyone. I believe the cops were invited. I don't know if they were mandatory to go, but for the most part, a lot of it's just informal stuff. As far as what we have, with the exception of, you know, the pre-set up resources, that type of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. So if it's big, there's these big critical incidences and there's multiple the departments that come, and then the different disciplines. So again, police, fire, EMS, and then dispatch takes the call. Has there in your 2 years, has there ever been a situation where all of you would be together to debrief, or is it still pretty much separated?
Yeah, not personally as far as I've seen, with that one exception, but I wasn't a part of that one. I don't know who all came. I just know that everybody was invited. So
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, I do know that there are a lot of cities and departments that are trying to do that a little bit more, having the bigger joint mutual aid debriefings. So I think that's something that I think should be encouraged going forward. Okay. Next question is, how do we make it not corny per se? Because you can come across someone genuine and wanting to help break the mental health stigma, but you just end up coming across as corny or losing traction you could be gaining. So how do we not come across corny to our peers or individuals that may be needing help in this space? This question can be answered by any of you. No one wants to take that.
I'll jump in. I think that's part of the whole, you want to, one thing about the fire service, we kind of joke with each other a little bit, right? And we have a little bit of fun, but you start to notice that it's affecting different people in different ways. And, sometimes just pulling them off the side and asking them, hey, are you okay? Checking in. The other thing is, checking in on somebody, inviting them. Hey, let's go have breakfast. Hey, let's go fishing. Let's go, I think that plays a big part. And, and the other part, I think we got to talk about it more. So like your frontline strong together, your phone number, back years ago, I worked with a guy in Grand Rapids, and I remember we got up for a call, and I was at a station with 10 folks. So there was a ladder truck and 2 engines. So there was lots of people. And I remember in the morning, he's standing there with a cup of coffee, and I could tell his demeanor had kind of changed, and it was in a good way. And I said, hey, you look like you're feeling better than you were last evening. And he says, I called the number. I said, well, what do you mean call the number? And I'm going to share, back in those days, there was no cell phones. It was literally, you had to pick up the phone on the wall and call the number. But the EAP program, we had put up posters, and he had called the number, and he says, somebody answered, and he says, well, you all were sleeping. He goes, I talked to somebody on the phone for an hour. And I said, that in itself, I think that's what we gotta get folks to, that if you can't sleep tonight, whether you're at home, whether you're at the station, wherever you're at, call that number. There's somebody going to be on the other end, and they're going to talk to you. And we've got to get folks to believe that. And then the other part is that sometimes folks say, well, then they'll know my business, and they'll know there's something wrong with me. And that goes back to the whole stigma thing. But I think, the biggest thing is that encouraging people in that, to stand up and to say, hey, I've got somebody I go talk to. Or, hey, I've called that number, and they do answer the phone. And then the other thing is that when you reach out to people, you talk about breaking the stigma, is I say this: if you don't hit it off the first time with a mental health professional that you meet with them, if Kobe and if he's my therapist and I walk in and I just don't feel like we click, you should tell Kobe at the end, Kobe, can you refer me to somebody else? It's not going to get any better. It's kind of like, if you went out to dinner with somebody and you walked away and said, I never want to go to dinner with that person again, why would you go back and have dinner with them 2 or 3 more times? You should share, hey, Kobe, we, for whatever reason, you and Sean said you work good with him, but we're not clicking. Because I think sometimes people get in a rut and they say, well, see, it didn't work. I went 3 times or whatever, but they'll also tell you that they didn't hit it off. So, and the other part is that, and I hear this a lot across the fire services, I've had folks that tell me that afterwards their clinician needed to talk to somebody because of what we unloaded on them. And so, and then the other part is that the people who are really good with the first responders, you can't get an appointment with them, which is a good thing that a lot of people are getting help. But the bad thing is, what about the folks that, I think down the road, we talk about recruiting and retention. We need to recruit mental health professionals to work more with first responders. I really think that's part of it.
And I want to touch on that question that Jordan asked, I believe.
The corny question.
Yeah. So going back to the joking, and I bring this up in one of my awareness classes that I go around. Kevin, you came up and actually sat through it. Is we're going to joke. There's no way around it. You're not going to take that away. It's just the personality we are. We're different, and we're going to laugh and joke. But what you got to think about, especially as your senior firefighters, something that like your new people look up to, what is that going to do to them? If they're feeling down about that call or struggling with that call and they see you laughing, joking, they're definitely not going to be like, that's really bothering me, because they're going to see you joking and think something's wrong with them. So as I want to tell like senior members that's been doing this a long time, whether you're an officer or not, if you're someone out there and you're joking stuff, that's fine. You're not going to change that. You're just not. But you got to know your people. So if you see someone that's being quiet and just kind of not want to chime in, it should be up to you to be like, hey, like, it's a simple question or a simple statement, just like, that was a shitty call. And that'll just open that door to that dialogue. And like, they could be like, oh yeah, instead of you're sitting there laughing. Like a lot of times we do catch ourselves doing that. They're not going to feel open to, ask a question. So I'll say that kind of on that corny question. It's just, we need to make it normal is what we really need to do.
Absolutely. Jordan also had another point. He said he thinks one of the biggest issues is our taxpayers don't know. They want to help the fire departments with what we need, but they don't know that we need this help. So they provide us insurance for when we're on call, volunteer or paid on call, but maybe open houses with the purpose of mental health for first responders behind it. We can get those mental health visits covered under the insurance from the calls. So that's actually a really good thought of being able to kind of have a space where having a space where first responders can come, or a setting weekly where first responders can come and they can talk to first clinicians that are culturally competent and well-versed with working with first responders in a setting where insurance or EAP or some kind of space can still cover that, and it's still confidential and anonymous. So that's actually really good.
Absolutely. And
yeah, I love
like
that.
I said, the taxpayers and the townships, they truly don't know. And Kevin and I have talked about this several times and met with a couple of the leaders of township association on this, and just letting them know that like this is an issue. It's an issue we're facing. We had history breaking like numbers last year, and we're already at half that, and we're only halfway through the year. So we don't want to repeat that. So definitely get it out there. I think it's huge.
Yes. Sean, we got another question for you. It says, Sean, do you see a difference in your dad and how he deals with bad calls now versus when you were a kid, now that there's more resources available versus back in the day?
Not really so much, because by the time I was, old enough to realize what's going on, he was in the well, he was the training chief, and now he's a state fire marshal, so he's not running anymore. But I can definitely tell you, my girlfriend's, both of her grandpas are firefighters, and my grandpa's a firefighter too. Obviously, we talked about that, but I can definitely tell you there's a difference between the way we deal with calls versus the way they dealt with calls. Back then, they didn't deal with it, so you can tell when they talk about it, the difference versus then versus now, I guess, would be the only comparison I got.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you were able to see that even as a young child coming home, you were able to tell when there was something different between your grandfather and your dad when they had been on a bad run.
Well, not necessarily, because both of them were out of that, but as far as the long lasting effects, if that
Gotcha.
makes
Mhm.
as older looking back.
Gotcha. Yes. And Kevin, that question can go for you too, since you are the middle generation there. Did you see a difference in how your dad handled kind of like a bad call or bad situations versus how you were taught when you finally got into the service?
I think, back when I was first getting it, even my dad, a lot of times they would get together, and I know some people are gonna, kind of cringe at this a little bit, but probably was more sorted out over a beer than it was at a critical incident stress debriefing. And I remember early on in my career, even in Grand Rapids, they would say, "Hey, we're after a tough week, maybe, or a tough shift." Folks would say, "Hey, we're going to stop somewhere in the morning." I'm talking about 7 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of stuff would get talked out. And a lot of the younger folks, when I was a younger firefighter, the older firefighters are saying, you're all right to feel that way. That's, part of, how it does feel. And so you talk through, and in some ways it kind of was like a debriefing, right? Because you're all kind of sitting around in a group. I think what it's morphed into more now is that even the peer stuff, that trying to look out for each other, and what are the services that are available, and do people know that these are available, and that it's not going to cost them nothing to at least get into it. And I think that part's what's really changed. And Susan put on there, I was looking in the chat, and Susan's doing a great job up there in the UP. And one of the things that she brings up a valid point, though. We've lost a couple of people this week that died by suicide, or in the last couple of weeks, that were very young, very early into their career. And I will say this, that in Grand Rapids back in the early 2000s, we had two folks that died by suicide. They were older. One was a Vietnam veteran, or Vietnam era veteran. The other one was an older guy too. So that's one of the things that we see too. And I totally get it, that you get to the end of your career, and you're not running calls anymore. You're retiring, and you're not going to get to go to this stuff. That is a mental health part that we're looking at. But it does concern me, and it does make me think about that, especially having a 22-year-old son who is following in the footsteps as a responder. That, and then going back to the two young folks this week, is that somewhere along the line, and I see it all the time, if you need help, call. If you need help, call. But a lot of these folks aren't going to call. It's going to be us noticing there's a change, and us reaching out to check on them. And I was telling somebody this, and maybe this was a good parable to kind of take it back to it. Back in the late 90s, I was involved in muscular dystrophy and running the telethon in Grand Rapids. And there was no texting and Facebook and any of that stuff. And you'd put a poster up on the wall, "Hey, I need 12 people for the telethon on Labor Day." And I'd be like, a week before, I got 3 people. And I'm like, I'd even they'd put over the all call to all the stations, "Hey, if anybody wants to help," still crickets, nobody. But so then as I ran calls or shift change, I'd say, "Hey, Kobe, can you help me?" "Yeah, I can help you." "Hey, Sean, can you help me with that?" People need to be, when you ask people, I could get 12 people right away. But if you think putting a poster up, or you think putting up, "Hey, call me anytime," a lot of those folks, that's not what you're going to do. But if you ask them, I think you got a higher success rate of checking in on people. And then the other part, Susan hits on it a little bit, I think, in her question too, is that we don't necessarily, we teach folks how to pull a hose line off. We teach them how to tie knots. We teach them how to trust that SCBA they're going to put on. We teach them how to search. But do we teach them to be prepared for what they're going to see? whether you're an EMT riding in the back of an ambulance or an MFR, you're going to see this. When you see this, this may affect you. And these are some of the things. I think we can do a better job on that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think we're working on that. I know, Mike, I don't know if he could chime in, but I know they're doing stuff at the police academy level as well. But it's really getting in those academies. We're working with the Chiefs Association and trying to build a curriculum to get in there as well. And they're very open-minded to that. I think that's something we should be looking at because there's, other states doing it. And I think I've always told you, like, I really want to see us lead in the way. And I think we'll get there. But to kind of touch on what Susan said or asked, not going to try to figure out what was going on with the two, but just going off statistics, we're looking at like there's 42% average that brings childhood trauma into this line of work already. And that drives the want to help people as well. So there's already trauma. And then you start looking at people that are coming over from active war or from military services that are already dealing with PTSD. They want to continue serving their community. So we're seeing a lot of that. We got to do a better job at knowing our individuals. I think Kevin, you could talk on this, but like I remember when I first joined, the amount of picnics and baseball games, everyone's busy now. You hear that all the time. Sean talks about it in his class. It's a famous thing. We're busy. We don't do a lot of that now, but you really have to know the individuals you're working with to know their normal baseline, to know if something's not normal, if something's not right with them, or something's going on at home. And I wish I had an answer for that of how to get back to that, but it's just hard because you're talking about households that both spouses have to work now, and it's just a busy time traveling teams and all this with the kids, so it's hard to get back to that, but I think we're getting there.
Absolutely. Okay. I don't think you guys read Susan's question, but you guys did read it, but we didn't get to read it out loud. So Susan, thank you so much. Susan, Andrea is one of our FST5 peers who is a rock star doing amazing things in the UP right now. So kudos to you, Susan. But her question was, Michigan just lost 2 first responders in the last month to suicide. There were from situations that were on the job in a very short time. What can we do better as peer supports to help support all of our first responders? And so those were the questions, the question that both Kevin and Colby just responded to. Okay, we did have some comments that I want to read out and give the panel an opportunity to speak to as well. We had Ashley who said that both her parents were first responders. So they always worked Christmas for extra pay. And so they've always celebrated Christmas early and other holidays early. And she continues to carry that on right now for her families. So it's stuck with her family as a first responder as well. And then Jordan says, speaking of support and doing better for the current generation, if there's any other DoD firefighters, military, or civilians, there's a great Facebook group called Department of Defense Fire and Emergency Services PTSD and Suicide Initiatives. It's a great group for our guys and gals who are all doing their part to break the mental health stigma. So again, that is a Facebook group that is called Department of Defense Fire and Emergency Services PTSD and Suicide Initiatives. Okay, thank you so much for that, Jordan. That's a great resource. And then we had a comment from Mike who says, police academies are trying. It's regulated hours at the state level of how many hours of what is taught in the police academies. Definitely need more on mental health. So that's what's going on in the PD academies? Is there, I know Sean mentioned earlier that there are some conversation about mental health in the SD academies now. Kevin and Kobe, was that the case when you guys were training?
Not when I went through my academy in 03.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mine was a long time before his 03, and no, there really wasn't. You know, I think Susan asked a question, and she kind of was asking Sean, you know, hey Sean, why do you think these younger responders aren't asking for help? I mean, you're kind of in that generation. A thought process maybe why you maybe wouldn't ask for help?
I don't know, as far as other than other people not growing up in it. I think just, when you come in, you're kind of like, especially like your first month or whatever, you're scared to ask where the butter is in the fridge. You know what I mean? You don't want to step on any toes. Let alone, hey, that call that everybody else just went through, it kind of messed me up, but it didn't mess any of you guys up. I think it's just people are too afraid to kind of admit that it bothered them. You know what I mean? Because your first year, really, you're proving yourself. Whereas I think it's starting to change more now, where it doesn't matter how long it's been, if it's your first call or your 50,000th.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we've heard that previous to with some younger generational first responders, is that you're just kind of trying to be a part of the space and not necessarily wanting to reach out. Another response that we've gotten to that question before too is that a lot of our younger generation think that mental health is kind of like something that you do at like your annual physical appointment, right? So like, oh, I'll just check up on that with my primary care doctor, kind of separating the two. And I think that goes back to the point of Kevin, what you were saying, like it has to be like your dentist that you would call if you had a chipped tooth, then you need to go in there. If you need a mental health checkup, you kind of have to have someone that's in your pocket and in that space where you can call if you need to. Or at least know the number that you can call and directly get the phone answered by someone, and it will be answered by a first responder as well. So that's the beauty of the 833-34 strong phone number.
What was that phone number again?
833-34 strong, 1-833-347-8766.
Yeah. And that's a good point of, the same thing of, if you knew, that's the part that before we leave here tonight, I want everybody to know, you can call that number 24/7.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if you're listening in from Gulbevic County on the far west end of the UP out by Ironwood, and you're having some thoughts tonight, call that number. I think that's, and you don't have to be in a super bad place to call that number either. I think that's what I've had some people tell me. They go, Kevin, you go to all these things and it says, if you think you're going to take your life by suicide, you should call this number. I'm not there. But who do you call in the in-between process? Well, I think we've got a number now. This is the number you call, kind of like go back to, hey, I just chipped my tooth and I just had my teeth cleaned last week. I'm not going to wait 6 months to see a dentist, I hope, right? You would hope that I would say, hey, I want to call this number and I'm gonna ask somebody, what should I do with this chip? In this case, what should I do with my mental health? I think we get people to understand that. But Sean is straight on. I don't care, even 39 years ago, you didn't ask where the butter was in the fridge because you were like, well, I should know that. Well, how do you know that, right? And it wasn't covered in training. The other thing we get is, how do you link all the things in training together? So you could say, well, I can do this skill, I can do this skill, I can do this skill. But a lot of times we don't push them all together. And yet out on the street, real time, it gets pushed together and it becomes really real, and you see some stuff, and you need to have a plan. Especially if you're wearing a collar brass, if you're a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, a battalion chief, folks, you got to be looking out for your people, and even pulling them off to the side and even having that kind of conversation. Hey, Sean, I get it that you don't want to say something in front of everybody because you don't want to be as Kobe says, the brunt of the jokes for the day. But the reality is that make it comfortable enough that people can ask.
Absolutely. Okay. Mike gave us another comment. He said he went through the police academy 21 years ago and there was no mental health talk during the academy then. He said just eat well, work out, physical health for sure, but no mental health care. So we definitely have to make sure that we're seeing that in the academies now.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then Ashley says, I'm a second generation first responder. I grew up seeing my with calls by not dealing with it. So for me, I thought that is how it was. That was just a part of being the job. It's what you signed up for. So she grew up seeing that you don't do this, and hopefully now Ashley's being able to see a different way of or options to kind of
Yeah.
deal with the things that are there.
And touch on this, and it's okay with her. She's on my team as well, but she's a generational responder as well. But her father actually committed suicide 10 years ago. So I know this is a tough topic for her, but it's definitely a different spectrum when you look at generational responders and seeing the mental health do that effect. So any of you want to kind of touch on that?
Yeah, is that the culture, or was that the culture? Sure, it was, right? That, hey, we're not going to deal with it. I think that's the part of as we move forward, is getting folks to buy into dealing with how you feel after a call, during a call. And we talk about after the call. I'll speak to myself. I have more triggers on stuff long after the call, and I've had it my whole career. I can go to a failed fire. I had an older firefighter tell me this years ago. He could recite addresses to me one night. We're sitting in the watch office. He's telling me, "Yep, this address, this many people died. This address, this many people died." I'm like, "Holy smokes!" But for him, it was the triggers. And I'll say this: if you were to bring up Sigsbee Street in Grand Rapids, I had a near miss. I'll say that. And when I say a near miss, we made it out. And we made a grab on somebody, we'd gotten them out too, but then things went crazy right after that. And that starts to play with your head a little bit too, right? 30 seconds the other way, right? And it's different. Or we calls where we thought we were, going to be able to, maybe help or save this person. And so, but it might be a trigger on a call 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road. It could be driving down that street. It's intersections. It's that tree alongside the road. And I think that's where I hear it from a lot of folks is, hey, that's the way I have to drive to work every day. That's the way I got to take my kids to school every day. That's the way I got to bring my kids home from school every day. And so, those are some of the things that, we if you don't deal with it, I think that's where we see that, unfortunately, that we see folks, dying by suicide because they didn't get the help that they need, and that's what we're really trying to push forward into, to make it more mainstream, more accessible. I was joking with you. Can you say the number again? But I'm not joking. That number, and I'm going to share this with you. I want to come forth as a state fire marshal and say, I would like to, and I think I can come up with some funds to make it happen too, is to how do we get a poster in every fire station? So then I need the folks that are on this call of, I'm going to need some help in Marquette County. Susan, can you make sure that we can get these up all over? And it doesn't necessarily have to be just fire stations either, right? That even at ambulance companies, right? There's a lot of private EMS. There's a lot of community-based EMS, especially in the UP. How do we get that word out to folks that you should call this number? And it's not going to cost you anything to call that number either, too, because some people are, okay, what's this going to cost? Well, I'll be all right. I'll work through it instead of dealing with it because they're scared of what the cost is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We'll send you FST5 posters that you can put up in your department for free, no cost to anyone. So
Right.
if you are interested in doing getting any of these posters, brochures, you can either contact one of our FST5 peers or reach out to us at info@fst5.org. That's our email address. Or you can easily call the phone number there and ask for it there too, 833-34-STRONG, 833-34-STRONG. Okay. This has been a great conversation. I think we have one more comment, right, Bobby? We have a few. Okay. So Jordan says, there's a facade that the older generation of first responders didn't talk about the cause or have the suck it up mentality. So the new generation doesn't want to ask the older generation because they don't want to be seen as weak, especially when you're new and you're trying to impress your senior folks by asking for mental health. The younger folks think that the older folks will see it as a sign of weakness. So we kind of touched on that, but absolutely, I think that is what happens a lot with the younger generations when they connect with the older generations. So I think that it's a space where we have to as older generations, we have to task ourselves with being able to make sure that this is normalized. Talking about mental health is normalized. Yes.
And
Hey, can
and
I
to
add
touch
on to
on
that?
that,
Yeah.
more so than not, when we do a debriefing and have the older generation in there, they will come to us at the end and be like, I wish I had that when I first started. So as a younger generation, don't be afraid to start this. Like I certainly wasn't. I had the support I needed. I had my mission and the passion, and I didn't care what people think. So if this sits right with you, and it should, because you should care about your fellow brother or sister, because they are family, then do it. Like, cares what they think, do what's right.
Absolutely. Ashley, you are a rock star. I don't even think I've ever met you, but I just wanted to tell you that. Thank you so much. Ashley says, my dad's suicide has gave me the passion to become a mental health professional specifically for first responders. Thank you so much for all that you do, not only being a second generation first responder, but then also wanting to be a mental health professional. Kudos to you, my dear. Okay. So we have gone over a little bit, and we always do because these conversations are so great. I'm so happy that this conversation went so well. Sean, Kevin, any last statements before we sign off for the nights?
Thanks for having me on, and it was good to be able to get on here with all of you and talk about something we just need to be talking about. And I think the future is bright in the fire service, EMS, law enforcement, especially if we, kind of, these are some of the hard topics to talk about, but the more we talk about them, I think we're moving things in the right direction. So keep up all the good work that you're all doing. And there's a lot of folks that are across the state are making up these teams. And I would encourage you, as we put on some of this mental health training around the state and such, or even if you're on a team right now, who's your replacement? Where's the sustainability? Where's the succession planning to start grooming somebody? I've had a lot of folks over my career. I give a big shout out to Paul Huffnagel, who was the state union president in the state for the firefighters union and went on to be an IFF president. But he saw something in a young guy in Grand Rapids to get me involved in committees and put me in places where I would have never gotten to go. But that's the mindset we got to pay it forward. We got to leave it better than the way we found it. I know that's kind of a cliche, but it's real. And that even getting Sean on tonight, I hope that he looks at mental health in the fire service totally different, and I can share with him. I'm excited to see what's going on over in Muskegon. I'm excited to see how they're all coming together and moving things forward, and get involved in committees and go to events, and you start doing that. I think we can make a big change. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you both so very much. All right, Kobe, I know you have some quick reminders for us that you want to share for our fans.
I do not actually, because I don't think we have, besides the August 29th.
August 5th?
Just
Yes.
that's true.
August
That's
5th.
August, no, the 6th.
The 6th. There we go. There we go.
Caught you. So yes, NASCAR is actually huge supporters for first responders. And we're doing a first responder night at the International Speedway. So I encourage you to bring the family, bring the friends. Frontline Strong and Northwest Michigan Peer Network will be sponsoring that, and we'll be there. I plan on being there. It's just a good time to get out there and just enjoy the time we have. So I encourage that. We have a retreat coming up the end of July. That's just more of, we talk about this all the time, and it's just coming together and talking to folks alike. And I think that's highly important, something I miss in the service, something we could do more. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to get more activities out there where we could all come together and spread the awareness and what we're doing, especially on the Frontline Strong aspect. So get out there, watch for our webinars. We have awesome podcasts by Mike and Jeff, who do a phenomenal job. We just had 2 retired New York firefighters on there. If you didn't watch that through your podcast streaming, get on there and do that, because they did a phenomenal job. They talk a lot on mental health, as we know the loss that they experienced. So it's important.
Absolutely. The name of that podcast is Minds on the Front Lines. So you can check that out at any streaming network that you have. All right. And again, reminders, fst5.org. Please call the line if you need us for anything, 1-833-34-STRONG. Again, that is 1-833-34-STRONG. All right, guys. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day and a holiday weekend. And we will see you guys again in August. Thanks so much, guys.